Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Barbara. I'll be your facilitator this morning. Buckle up. Um, there will be no refreshments served today. It should be a bumpy flight. So, um, I want to get started by, um, before we get to questions, even, by reading something that I found that I thought was very expressive of just what the Creator does. And it goes this way: everything that God, the source and substance of all, creates in this world flows naturally from the essence of God's divine nature. Creation is not a choice, but a necessity. It's God's nature to unfold time and space. Creation is the extension of God. Creation is God encountered in time and space. Creation is the infinite in the garb of the finite. The infinite in the garb of the finite. Sounds like us. To tend to creation is to attend to God. This is the part I like. To attend to creation is to attend to God. To attend to the moment is to attend to eternity. That's why we talk about being in the now. To attend to the part is to attend to the whole. We are all bound in this together, regardless of how separate we think we are. And the final one, to attend to reality, is to live constructively. So, whatever we do, God is in it. That's all this is saying. Whatever we do, whatever situation we find ourselves in, or whatever situation we see other people in, there's always light in that. And we can find it if we look for it. So even the worst person that we can think about has some light in them, and that's the beauty of never giving up on someone. Ron was talking last week. I want to attend to a question from last week that someone talked about related to, I believe it was Rebecca. We talked about a lot of things last week. But first, let me see if there are any other questions before I plunge in. Any questions from last week that Pastor can answer?
This is Vermel. I have a question about last week. I think it's a question. The actions with Isaac and Esau, the physical and the spiritual, that is duality, right? That is the duality that is in each of us, determining whether we want to let our physical side rule or our spiritual.
Yes, that is indicative of duality in us. All of the stories are about us.
Okay, even I went back as far as Cain and Abel in my mind.
Yes.
We are both of them in our one physical being.
Attributes of Cain and Abel are in us.
Okay, all right.
Are there other questions?
This is Nick. Have you ever wondered why duality seems to be a present everywhere in creation? Since we just, Barbara, you just mentioned creation itself seems to be like a necessary automatic extension of the Creator. Why would that create duality? What is that?
Well, the fact that there is the Creator and then there's us implies from unicity came duality.
Mm-hmm.
because we were one and are one with the Creator. The implication is that the Creator created us to see itself, in a sense. And so duality is, for us, being able to see the differences and the likenesses between things, and are the positive and the negatives, and are the good, the ripe and the unripeness, so that we can choose ripeness. That's one explanation. Have you got another, Nick?
I agree. Thank you. Let me, yes, and.
Okay.
Since we're.
So, this is Ramel.
Oh, go ahead.
This is Ramel. I think I lost something in that, because what came to my mind after Ms. Barber spoke was, does that mean oh gosh, I can't believe I'm asked this. Does that mean God has a physical side?
No.
That's not what you're
No.
saying.
No,
This is Nick.
that's not what I'm saying.
This is Nick.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yes, that's correct. And then,
What's
Barbara,
correct?
that's correct. God
Okay.
doesn't have a physical side. We am it.
You're it.
We am it, Nick.
Yes.
So we got that physical side with the giving of the gift of free will to make a choice whether we want to.
I think we got that physical side because we had to create our own universe.
Oh,
We are Elohim having physical experience, right?
right.
Elohim created everything spiritual in regards to us, right?
Yes.
When physicality was brought into being, the words were dominate, right?
Dominion. Yes.
We have dominion over that. So if we have dominion over it, that means that we can set the boundaries, which means that we are in the process of creating our own physical, universal existence.
Good morning. This is Audrey. But then,
Morning.
my question is, wasn't that how it had to be? Because there's duality in everything. I mean, there's up, down, there's right, left, there's east, west, there's north, south, there's just duality in everything. Wasn't it that way for us to be a mirror, for the spiritual side to be a mirror to the physical side, or whatever? Anyway, that's my question.
When I look at duality according to the spiritual, I see it differently than I do in the physical. And the reason is because in the physical, our concept of duality usually speaks to two separate things. When we talk about duality from the spiritual perspective, we are talking about two entities that cannot exist without the other, which is like a coin, one side of the same coin, or the other side of the same coin. You have to have both sides in order for it to exist. So when we talk about that, I do believe that we're looking at duality in the spiritual sense, but it appears to be singularity in the physical sense, as in that coin having two sides, but is one single coin. Does that make sense, Ms. Audrey?
Yeah.
Yeah. To go further with this idea, but not just an idea, is actually with this fact, is as if the physical dimension is a portion of Elohim, a portion of God, so to speak, an iteration, but that to fit in a physical realm. And in order to fit in that physical realm, which our senses are automatically set up to do, is there is duality in this realm, or at least that's the way it is actually being perceived anyway, in order to create this realm. However, in a sense, outside of this realm, or when you think of all the realms of what God is, period, there is no duality. So, as we were speaking earlier, we're kind of like noticing the different portions of God and experiencing and being different portions of God, and then from that actually creating something that is different. But at the same time, this is no difference from, in a sense, us having one dream in the middle of the night in terms of experience and actually creating something. But this is God experiencing itself in a different way.
Yes, sir.
So we're back to
And let me yes, and that again. Duality and all the things we perceive to be separate, and our perception of separateness is the riddle posed to our awareness that catalyzes the process of enlightenment and reunification with that thing that we think is separate from us, that we call God. So when we encounter that separation and are perplexed by it, how can things appear to be different and yet we're all united by one thing and are ultimately the same? We're two sides of the same coin and cannot exist without each other. What does that mean? And that is the thing that tugs on our sort of unconscious awareness that this physical experience is an illusion relative to the reality that created it.
And you said when we encountered that separateness, but did you intend to say, when we encounter that perception of separateness? Because if we're seeing it from the macro level, there is no separateness from a spiritual perspective. It's one.
Eventually, we realize that,
same.
But it's the same. It's encountering anything requires perception of it. So, but before you become aware that things are connected and that separateness is an illusion, you experience it as such.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, George.
Hey, how everybody doing? By way of duality, God may not be in everything, and I do emphasize may. With me, the duality that's in me, number one, is my mind. The other duality is my heart. And the heart can be number one, and my mind can be number two. Whenever I do something with my mind, where I am now, I just expect physical results. Yet, whenever I do something with my heart, I'm more connected to, number one, my inner self, and I'm more connected to a supreme being. The reason why God was so connected to Jesus is because whatever Jesus did, if it is so true, his heart was always in it. If you look at Cain and Abel, he accepted one's blessing, Maybe because his heart was in it and he rejected the other because his heart wasn't in it, just his mind. So the duality that's in me, I'm not going to say that's in you all, yet in me, whenever I do something with my heart, I feel like I'm in concert or I have a certain degree of frequency or decibel with the Most High. And if you do your research on it, some may know, some may not know, whenever the Egyptians would communicate to the sun god called Ra, or to the youthful side of the moon and or the feminine side of the moon, their hand would always be over their heart because they felt like they were in frequency of Sony, S-O-N-I or S-O-N-E. So the duality that's in me, when I operate by my mind, I automatically expect physical results. That doesn't mean I won't see anything spiritual. I just expect physical results. Yet when I
George?
operate, yes, ma'am.
Let me correct something that you said. You said that the duality in you when you first got started talking, God may not be in it. God is always in it, regardless of whether we perceive that we're in contact or not. God is in every situation, because God is in everything. So if there's a perceived separation, it's only because we are the ones who create that gap. For instance, you were talking about your mind versus your heart. Well, you are the one who's choosing to create that distance, that distance by saying, when I do it with my mind as opposed to my heart. But it doesn't matter what you perceive, God is always in it, whether it's your mind or your heart.
And thank you for the correction on that. Like I said, I did say, I emphasized may when I operate in my mind. Thank you for the correction. When I operate in my mind, I disconnect myself from God. Right. And that's how it should have been appropriately. And thank you for the correction.
You're welcome.
So that's about it right there.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, George. Any other questions? Well, last week, there was something that related to Rebecca and what Rebecca did when she, I guess she doctored Jacob up by putting goat skins on him to try to deceive Isaac and to obtain the birthright that was Isaac's, to obtain it for Jacob. And I wanted to just go back to Genesis 25:23 to answer that question. Well, it wasn't Genesis 25:23. It was, it is 25. It was, let me find it in this Bible. 25:23. Let's go back 22. This is when Isaac prayed to the Lord on his wife's behalf because she was barren. And Rebecca subsequently got pregnant. But she was having so much, she felt the children moving and tussling within her so much. She says, so why is this going on? And the Lord said to her, 2 nations, this is Genesis 25:23, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 manner of people will be separated from within you. And one people will be stronger than the other people, and the older will serve the younger. And so, in fact, there were twins in her womb. And so Rebecca remembered this when she was trying to garnered the birthright for Jacob. Because Jacob is the youngest one. He was born second. And so she remembered this prophecy of God. The thing about this is that we don't like to wait. So, because what I'm trying to get out of this as I read all these stories is, okay, what's in it for me today? Well, what's in it for me today, regardless of when it was then, is that we don't like to wait. We don't like to, we talked about a number of weeks ago, this issue of certainty and being assured that what the Creator says will occur. And this is what the Creator said to her. But just like Sarah, who took things in her own hands, because after a period of time of waiting, nothing happened and she didn't have any children, she gave Abraham's Hagar, her maid. This is what Rebecca did. She preempted the Lord by obtaining the birthright for Jacob in her own right. And so that's what we do too. Sometimes there are things that are going on. We've asked for things, and it's been in alignment with what God wants to give us or what the Creator wants to provide for us. But we don't want to wait for it. We want to take things in our own hands. That's the creative part of us too. We want to take things in our own hand and create our own outcomes. Well, creating our own outcomes apart from it being aligned with the Creator and what the Creator had in mind makes for different kinds of, results than we thought. And so in answer to the question last week about why Rebecca did this because she did remember this promise that the Lord has said that the older will serve the younger. She just didn't wait for God to bring that into fruition. Questions, comments?
Was it a good thing?
None?
Oh, this is Nick. Was it a good thing for her to
It ended up
create her own
do that?
timeline, shall we say?
I believe. Go ahead, Beth, and then
I'm with Nick in that she actually was a part of the plan from the beginning to bring it to fruition. Because there was no indication that the Creator was upset with what she did.
Oh, and I agree with that. But the thing that I'm thinking about is that lots of times we don't know we're part of the plan. And I guess what Rebecca did was she went from her intuition that I got to get this done. And at the same time, I'm thinking, well, you know what? All things work together for the good, and this did work together for the good because it was in alignment with where they were headed, with where God was headed in terms of Esau and Jacob. But sometimes the lesson in it for me is sometimes we do jump the gun. We can jump the gun. And just like the people with Moses. Moses came down, several hours later than they expected. Had the people waited, the whole milieu, the whole environment would have changed for them. But they jumped the gun. They were ready at the track, ready to run down that track, and the official hadn't pulled the trigger yet, but they took off running. And what happened was that they ended up circulating around in the wilderness for 40 years until they were ready to receive what it was that the Creator had intended for them in the first place. That's the perspective I'm coming from. Comments, questions?
I have a question. This is Rania. If it took them 40 years to get ready because they jumped the gun, once, were they really ready 40 years before?
Well, they were ready 40 years later because the old people had died out. The ones who, and a lot of the ones who came with them from Egypt, who were not Israelites, but some of the Egyptians came with them as well. And some of the pot stirrers, if you will, in the group. All of that generation died out. And so you no longer had the murmurings that much anymore about, you should have let us die in Egypt, because at least we had food to eat back then. At least we had water readily available back. You didn't have all that murmuring then. And so it's like the people were positioned consciously to move to the next place, not geographically, but spiritually. Other questions? Rania, did that? Rania?
Yeah, it was just curious to think that you could be ready when something is time or perceived to be by the actions by God, but still, but still not be. I don't know how to explain that.
Well, the other thing came to me
is that a mistake,
Yeah, the other thing too is that sometimes we procrastinate too much, and the Creator allows things to progress so that we get to that point where we have to make decisions about whether I want to do it the Creator's way or my way. We are pushed from the ledge and say, okay, it's time to jump now. You decide. You decide who you will serve. Will you serve your own inclinations, or will you serve the Creator who made you? Someone was coming in a minute ago. I don't know if it was Vermella or Janice.
It's Janice.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I heard when you said that the old people died out that were thinking a certain way. I perceive that as certain thoughts that we have to let go of before we can move to the next area that the Creator has for us, which kind of made me think too of Rainia's point. You're ready, but maybe there are just some thoughts you can't take with you.
Yeah, your suitcase is ready, but you can't get everything in it.
Yeah.
So you have to decide what you're going to need and what's going to be of help to you, what's going to fit you, that kind of thing. So in a sense, that's another way to put it in terms of today's vernacular.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
I see it also as if we look at it from how we see things today, I see that as the thoughts of old has to be dealt with. I think that the people who died in the wilderness are actually representative of what we would call the concept of Christianity, evangelical or otherwise, today, and they are the concept that brings about the confusion that is in existence now. And as long as we perpetuate these religions, we are giving life to them. And what we are actually doing now is removing the life from them, and in the midst of this wilderness, in the midst of the confusion that we are now experiencing in this earth, we are beginning to see the thoughts of old, the thoughts of antiquity, the thoughts that came out of Egypt, the thoughts that came out of a slave religion beginning to die out now, because it's not because they're being replaced with something as much as what the truth is being remembered now. I'm done.
Thank you. But back to the initial question that Nick asked about whether this was about Rebecca. Just a reminder that everything will work out as it's purpose to work out, especially when the desire is there, when our desire is ripe. Just like what happened with Lot's daughters, who had children by him. Well, that line of people that came from Lot's daughters, Ruth was one of them. She was a Moabite, and descended from Ruth was King David. Same thing with Judah, one of Jacob's sons that we're going to get into, because we're going to actually talk about the names of all of these children and what they mean for us today. Same with Judah, though. He had relations with his daughter-in-law, although he didn't know it was his daughter-in-law at the time. Doesn't matter. He still had the relations with her. And through that line of ancestry, Jesus was born. And so what's going to happen is going to happen. There's sometimes things that we can do that might speed it up or might slow it down, but the issue is, what is our consciousness at the time? What degree of enlightenment do we have? And if we are enlightened, when we do a thing, it relates to the rightness of the situation for the time, because again, time was created in this world that has time, in this time-space motion dimension. Time is created, but there are things that can happen in the bat of an eyelid, potentially, from the time that we request it and the time that it manifests, as well. So I guess what I am saying is that we can determine to a large extent what happens and when it happens and how it happens by our level of consciousness and enlightenment. I don't know if that resonates or not, but
it does. And
there it is.
Thank you, Teacher Barbara. Let's imagine that every place you see written in the Bible that deals with lineages, who married who and who were children of who and what they did, is speaking directly to how that consciousness, that awareness that you just spoke of, unfolds and evolves over time. The longer amount of time the more experience we have in this physical material realm that time is a part of. So not only does it apply to our evolving and unfolding consciousness and awareness, as a group, as a human group, but also individually, as we begin to unlock and unfold aspects of our own self. And that this book, as you mentioned, is telling the story of us, is in some way mapping out the history of how these aspects of self unfold and how they relate to each other, and how we collectively and individually have navigated the path through this spiritual history to get to where we are. And then also it tells us where we are going to. That's it.
If you're talking, Miss Barbara, you're on mute.
Thank you, I was. I said, thank you, Nick. And when we go through this and see how long it takes for them, and knowing what we know now and the level of awareness that we have now, I believe that we will understand why we are seeing things happen so quickly now, because they did not have to take all that time, is my point. It's just some of the decisions we made, some of the choices we made along in our lives have taken us on the scenic route instead of the direct route to where we were going. The scenic route means we might go through Sodom and Gomorrah. We might go through the land of the Philistines. It doesn't matter. It's the scenic route that we when we have a destination and we anticipate getting there, the scenic route, because of our decisions, can make the journey longer. That's what one of the lessons that I think we will see when we actually start talking about these folk and what they're doing and how they did it. It doesn't mean that the will of the Father, of the Creator, is not going to be done. The Creator's will is going to be done. And it'll just be done for us a lot quicker when we desire the same will that the Creator does. Pastor?
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly with that, because I see that the scenic route that we took was that of the Civil Rights Movement. And the Civil Rights Movement was based upon, in terms of the NAACP, Martin Luther, SCLC, SNCC, they were based upon the belief that what we were taught in Christianity was the absolute truth. And because of that, it has taken longer for us to get to this place where we can see the visibility of the same energy that existed at the end of our physical chain enslavement. And now that we're at this place, if we were to follow the same principles that were followed during the Civil Rights Movement, we would not see nearly as much rearing its head as we do now, because it would be too destructive. However, because we are looking at the same scriptures but seeing what the words really mean, we are able to see see what really exists pretty much in totality, but at the same time, we have dominion, and we're very much aware of that. Therefore, we are more able to contain it than we would have been had we been following the principles of old. So right now, I see that the changes are becoming more and more evident. One of the landmarks that I see in terms of change, I remember when this person died, and prior to their death, some of us have spoken of how things would change, but only after the Creator removed them from the scene. And when that happened, we saw the structure that He had put in place began to fall apart. So right now, because of the awareness that we have, and because we are relentless in our search for a keener sense of awareness, we are seeing deadly forces come to the surface. But as deadly as those forces were in the past, they now are more like toothless tigers than they would have been if we were not at a place of understanding what dominion actually looks like. I'm done.
Thank you, Pastor. Anybody else?
Just
Okay.
one.
Go ahead, Shell.
Oh, it was just one comment in regards to the sinning group and how long these things do or do not take. Essentially, what the Father has promised, or this journey, so to speak, is already, in a sense, finished when you look at it from a totality standpoint. It is us who make with our decisions, make this journey or this path is like customized by us at every particular point. So it is us who decide what that journey actually looks like. But the end point in terms of how we, not how we get there, but where we get to is already destined. And that in itself is also a part of creation that we are actually creating in the now. I'm finished.
Thanks, Shell. So the issue is that in terms of the spiritual, time is immaterial anyway. I've been making this case that it took time, but I mean, in the spiritual, there is no time. And I'm back to what Nick asked. His point was, it took place because it was time to take place in terms of the spiritual. It was right. What was done was ripe at the time, even though it seemed to be deceitful and trickery. It was ripe at the time, in a sense. Okay, if there are no other questions, then I'd like to really start with the covenant that God made with Abraham in Genesis 16. And there's some things that Ron has already taught that I won't go into detail. I'll just expect that we will be able to either refer to it and move on, or if there's a question, we'll answer the question. But there's a lot of this that he's already taught in detail. But my goal is to look at Abraham and the lineage and to see what has happened to this family that we can pull from that relates to us today. And even though it will not take as much in terms of the time it took for this family, what we can learn from this family can prevent heartache regardless of whatever time it takes. It can prevent heartache. It can prevent us from not taking hold of all of those good things that are available and promised to us. So Genesis 15:18 15:18 talks about the Lord making a covenant with Abraham, and said that to his seed he was going to give the land, and he talked about the dimensions of that land, from the river of Egypt, and he talked about all of the ites and the Amorites and the Girgashites, ones already gone through. He listed all of these because these were people who populated this area. But he was saying to Abraham, it doesn't matter who's there now, and it's expansive. But the issue is, this is what I am going to give to you and your descendants. And Abraham and Sarah received this information about descendants when she was still barren. I mean, they had been married a while. As a matter of fact, for some of the men, a lot of the men in the patriarchs, Terah was Abraham's father, and he didn't start having children until he was 70 years old. And then Abraham did not have his first child, which was through Hagar, until he was 89, something like that. So again, for people who are long livers back in the day when you were talking in the biblical times, I guess that was not even middle age for some of them. So Sarah's wife was barren, and Abraham had heard this prophecy about descendants. And so Sarah says, I can't bear any children. Take my maid and go into her and have a child with her. And she did, and he did. And so Ishmael was born from this man and woman, from Abraham and from Hagar. Now Hagar was an Egyptian that came with Sarah, that was given to Sarah by Pharaoh when they had gone down to Egypt earlier. And she bare Ishmael. And because Hagar had some issues with Sarah, her mistress, her son's name was God Will Hear. And her son's name was God Will Hear is because Hagar had run away a couple of times from Sarah, because things seemed to change between her and Sarah when she had the child. Hagar's attitude changed towards Sarah when she had a child, whereas she was the maid from one perspective. Now she was the bearer of a child by the Lord of the house, and she snubbed Sarah in her own way. And this was an affront to Sarah, because she was Abraham's soulmate in a sense. Sarah was Abraham's soulmate, and it really hurt her that she could not have a child. And in her loving kindness, if you will, she wanted to give Abraham the son, the descendant that was promised to him, and she gave him her maid. And now the maid was being somewhat sniping at her, was somewhat arrogant in terms of the way she presented herself, because she had Abraham's son. And so Abraham says, Sarah says, what have I done? My wrong be upon you. This is Genesis 16:5. I've given my maid into your arms. And when she saw that, and when she had conceived, she despised me. So Sarah said, the Lord judge between me and thee. The Lord judge between me and thee. Now, Sarah said this, the Lord judge between me and thee. And you'll probably remember this later on when Sarah later dies in childbirth. But Abraham said to Sarah, okay, she's your maid. You deal with her as you would. And so what Abraham actually did, or Abram at the time, was he put her back into her place as the matriarch. He says, just because she's having my son, she's still your maid. You still have authority over her, in other words. So you deal with her as you would. And so Sarah dealt harshly with her, and that's when God's angel, and when she ran away, Hagar ran away, that's when God's angel found her and convinced her to go back to Sarah, convinced her to go back to the family, because that's when the angel told her that, you know, this is Abraham's son also, and there's going to be a nation of people that come from him as well, because he's still part of the seed of Abraham, not necessarily the spiritual seed through Isaac, but a nation of people will come through him. And so Hagar did go back. So let's see, are there any thoughts or questions at this point? All right. Then let's go on. The angel has spoken to Hagar, and the angel has told Hagar that her seed would be exceedingly great. It would be multiplied. And the angel had told her to call him Ishmael. God hears. So Hagar bare the son, and Abram called his name Ishmael. Now, I don't know if Hagar told him that the angel said that the Lord said to call him Ishmael, but Abram called his name Ishmael. There's probably a story in that. I do know that God gave to Abram and to Sarah gifts of prophecy. Abram, in terms of their consciousness, they were at a high level of enlightenment, because they both could see far ahead. And it said that Sarah even could see more in some things than even Abraham. Okay, so when Abram was about 90 or so, the Lord appeared to him again and told him that he would make his covenant with him. He'd already told him, but it's like the Lord just keeps reinforcing, I'm going to make this covenant with you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. This is in chapter 17. We're about verse 1 or 2. And I'm telling you the verses because I don't want to have to read them. I want to synthesize them and move on. But if you have questions, feel free to stop me. So Abraham fell on his face. Oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord. You told me that. You told me that I'm going to be a father of many, but what about Esau? I'm sorry. What about Ishmael? What about Ishmael? That you would establish my covenant and my seed. You told me that. You told me that you would if I would be circumcised, and if I circumcised my family, that I would be given the land, all of Canaan, for an everlasting possession. And the Lord directed him to circumcise everybody, so he did. The flesh of his foreskin would be that token of the covenant itself. It would be that reminder. So going forward, as Ron had indicated earlier, the foreskin, the circumcision of the foreskin was a physical reminder of the spiritual promise that God had made between himself and Abram.
Barbara, I got a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When you said circumcise his family, meaning his thoughts?
The foreskin, the circumcision of the foreskin was a physical kind of thing, but yes, in a sense, it heralded the circumcision of the thoughts as well. Cut away those thoughts that are not in alignment with the Creator. Anything that's unright, cut it away. You don't need it right now. It's unright. So yes.
May I add something to that?
Yes, certainly.
The foreskin also was seen as an impediment to the seed of life coming forth, created a struggle. So once it was cut away, life could freely flow. So if we look at that in relationship to what Barbara's saying about the thoughts, then what we see is the cutting away of the foreskin is indicative of cutting away, as she said, any impediment that was going to create a struggle for Abraham or his descendants to continue a life of spirituality. Does that make sense?
Yes. Evelyn?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So do we constantly cut away the foreskin, or is it not continuum, something that we always do?
Remember, we talked about symbols. The foreskin is simply a symbol, a reminder, if you will. So yes, to answer your question, that's what we do. That's what the free will is about, filtering those thoughts and putting away those that are not in alignment with thoughts of whatever is good, whatever is, all of those thoughts that God wants us to have. Yes.
Right now, what happens with in Judaism, the circumcision that takes place in Judaism represents the circumcision that Abraham endured because he had to circumcise himself, and as well as his male descendants. They don't look at it beyond Abraham in terms of the way that we are discussing it now, where it represents the seeds of thought that bring forth spiritual awareness. They see it simply as being in keeping with the covenant of Abraham, as opposed to the continuous covenant that guides us along this pathway of spirituality and righteousness. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. That is another example of why when we speak and we see and we put in a macro now, things seem to happen so fast now because there was a limitation in thought around what the symbol meant for Abram, but that's been totally expanded, as Pastor has talked about, in terms of the spiritual realm. And we can understand now that it's whatever our thoughts are that separate us, that would tend to separate us, that could separate us from thoughts of our Creator, that we let them go. That's why things can happen so much faster now, seemingly. Okay, so this is a time, we're still in chapter 17. And this time when God told Sarah that he was going to change his name because in the previous chapter, he just changed Abraham's name, put the hay in it. We talked about that last time. And that he would bless her, and that kings would come through the union of Abraham and Sarah. Now, this is interesting, Pastor. I have a question for you. Abraham laughed. He said, shall kings come from Sarah and I? And he laughed, but later on, Sarah laughed. So why is it that Abraham wasn't questioned for laughing, but Sarah was? Anybody?
James just left the building.
Well, you seem to be speaking for him.
I think it was because the reason is because Sarah is the source of life. Abram is simply the seed, but not the source. And the source of life has a tremendous influence of the life that is within it. And it was more telling with Sarah's laughter than it was with Abram's. So
she was the source and the nourisher,
yes,
of life. And so here we go. We started talking initial questions of duality, but it's what we're saying is that Sarah was intimately necessary to the birth, just as necessary or more so to the birth as Abram.
Absolutely.
There's a seed. Seed is planted, but seed doesn't necessarily always have to grow if the conditions are not right. But if the conditions are right, then the seed is planted, it's grown, it's nourished, and it's birthed. And so therein also is an indicator of the necessity of the feminine and the masculine complementing one another. I'm talking about the energy now, not the gender necessarily. Although in the physical, it's just like all of this is symbolic. It's symbolic of what we can do in the physical too, but the spiritual is the higher truth that in terms of perceived duality, when there's a oneness and a unicity in thought and mind and heart, creation occurs. Thank you, Pastor. That was a great response, and it just I'm sure there's some thoughts that it caused others to have as well. So, somebody's going to say something? All right. So, Abraham did as requested. I won't spend as much time on Sarah laughing because Pastor's already taken care of that. They both had a response to the angel. They both did. And thankfully the response for Sarah, I don't know that it was as much of a doubt as it was. Oh man, I'm old. I haven't had any children, and I'm going to have children now. And the laughter, I believe, also relates to, man, just think, I'm going to be this older lady, and I'm going to be nursing a child, whatever. I don't believe it was a laughter with malice at all.
I agree with that, Barbara. I don't think it was malice at all. It was more like, oh my God, for real?
Yeah. Okay. In verse 16, I don't want to talk about the three angels unless you guys have questions. This is after Abraham circumcised himself, Ishmael his son, as well as everyone in his household, all the men in his household, whether they were of the household or whether they were servants, everybody. It was his sign to the Lord that yes, I accept your terms. I agree with them wholeheartedly. And so the three angels visited Abram, and Ron has talked about this and taught on this before, and this is where Sarah denied laughing. And this was prior to their Abram going down to Sodom and Gomorrah, because the angels were going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abram pleaded on their behalf. What if there are only 10 men? He went from 40 to 50. He went from 50 to 40 to 10, 20 to 10, and the Lord agreed. If I find 10 people, I'm not going to destroy it for the 10's sake. This was an indicator of what Abram did on behalf of not only Lot, but the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. So he pleaded and interceded not only for himself, because it's for his own people would have been for himself, but for others as well. Unlike Noah, who, when he was building the ark, the people were doing any and all kinds of things, Noah did not plead on behalf of the people to the Creator at the time. But this is part of who Abraham was. His name's been changed. He is the epitome of mercy and loving kindness. And so for us today, the takeaway is loving kindness is something that we need to nourish within ourselves. And we have said so much when we've been talking lately about the events of today, how important loving kindness is. Loving kindness is a part of forgiveness. And forgiveness is what erases things, if you will, not just for us, but for the people that we have aught against. It puts things back on an even keel, if you will. And so this is what Abram did on behalf of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Questions, comments?
I think that it also, Barbara, it balances us. It keeps us in a creative position. Loving kindness does. If loving kindness is not a constant in our lives, which means forgiveness is also a constant, if we have to wait a while to forgive someone, then we're also waiting a while before we are expressive of loving kindness towards them. And that in itself removes us from the stage of creativity and places it on hold. That in turn slows down what we call the progression toward truth and tranquility. So it's imperative that we do that, or that we live a life, rather, of loving kindness and forgiveness, as opposed to always being skeptical or being slow to forgive. Does that make sense?
It does, because it opens the door. When we delay loving kindness, it opens the door for unrightness to potentially come in. And then we have to deal with that, and then eventually be loving and kind. And so the issue is, why don't we just do what we need to do to start with?
Yes.
To prevent the introduction of unrightness, and to feed into the progression of rightness.
Right. Also, Barbara, I think that Well, let me say it this way. One of the reasons that I use the word creator is because it is I make every effort to avoid using the word father. And the reason I avoid using the word father is because in using the word father, even whether it's pater in the Greek or father, it cuts out the feminine totally. And when we disregard the feminine, it is no different than disregarding loving kindness. We are removed from the stage of creativity because without the feminine, nothing can be birthed. So I use the term creator because it involves both masculine and feminine. And father is gender-based, and it puts a description in our minds of a male as opposed to an androgynous being. I'm done.
Thank you, Pastor, for that reminder. And it's a reminder to me as well. Okay, so we've been talking about loving kindness, and Abraham, in a sense, being the father of loving kindness. So he was a chariot. He was a conduit through which loving kindness was funneled into the physical, in a sense, from the spiritual, because not only did he represent it, he lived it. That's why he sat in the door of his tent, with it being 3 days after being circumcised. Now, he's a 90-year-old man, but he sat in his tent looking for people to come by so that he could be kind to them. So he's our example for what it means to be in a state of and live in a state of loving kindness.
Barbara?
Yes, ma'am.
And what does the tent represent again?
The tent.
That Abraham sat in front of. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. The tent represents covering, and it's somewhat similar to the chuppah, which is the marital tent. It represents the oneness that Abraham had with the Creator itself. That Abraham was always open to sharing, because Abraham always was in a sharing mode with the Creator itself. And the tent represents that covering, which provided whatever was needed when it was needed, as it was needed. For him in the sun physically, even though he had the tent, which provided shelter and which provided shade, Abraham was in the door looking out in expectancy that somebody's going to pass here who needs to have some rest from out of the sun. So he was looking forward to providing and sharing what had been provided with and to him and for him. I'm sure someone else has other comments.
Well, let me ask you, so the door represents another portal, or he was, I know, we're talking about symbols.
The doorway is a portal to the upper world.
Okay.
Symbolic of the portal to the upper world.
Okay.
May I, Bob, also?
Yes, sir.
The tent, in addition to what Barbara's talking about, if you think about it in terms of bet, the alphabet, that out of which everything was created. The reason Genesis starts with Bereshit, beginning, is because that is the womb of all the other letters. It is the womb of Elohim. And it is the opening through which all creativity in life passes. So Abraham sitting at the entrance to the tent was indicative of all the things that he was capable of bringing into this earth from the creative womb of Elohim. And he was granted this privilege because of what he had done. He had entered a covenant with the Creator. And as Barbara said, 3 days after he circumcised himself, here he is sitting there. And that is indicative of us. When we are certain as to our relationship in terms of covenant relationship with the Creator being one with, we are in that same space that Abraham was in. And being in that space that Abraham was in, our words, not only do they carry weight, but they bring into fruition whatever is verbalized. And in addition to that, our simple presence is the presence of loving kindness. It is the presence of forgiveness in search of someone who needs to be forgiven, in search of someone who needs loving kindness, in search of someone who is in need, period. And it's imperative also that we always represent him as Abraham as opposed to Abram. Abram only for teaching purposes, because to call him Abram and not Abraham is to separate him from the covenant that he entered with the Creator. I'm done.
Thank you, Pastor.
And while you were
Yes.
talking, Pastor, I saw new life. For some reason, that just came to me.
And that's a good reason for it to come to you, because life is always new. The spiritual cannot grow old. The house does, as in the house that we live in physically now, grows old, just as the body is the house to the spiritual. The spiritual doesn't change. Think about it this way. The person who transitioned, and you were aware of their transition, and they were close to you, when you see that person, they're no older. When you think of them, they're the same age. This is a reminder that the spirit does not age at all. It remains as it is. It becomes more aware, but it does not age. I'm done.
Additionally, when we go further, you'll see that Abraham, how do you say that? Anyway, Abraham had 8 sons, 2 by his wife Sarah and by Hagar, and 6 by Keturah, whom he later marries after Sarah's death. And 8 also means new beginning or new order of things. So that's probably what you saw flash in you, Evelyn, the symbolism of new life.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
In chapter 20, what is the lesson here?
Ms. Barbara?
Abraham and Abimelech. Yes, ma'am.
What does Abraham mean, the name?
The father of many nations.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. The lesson in chapter 20, Abraham and Abimelech. Abraham journeyed a number of different places, and Ron has already said that just about everywhere Abraham went, if you look at Isaac and Jacob, they repeated and traveled in the same circle. Now think about that, traveled in the same circle, yet it was 400 years later before they came out of bondage in Egypt and traveled those same circles again, and finally got the lands that were promised to them. So Abraham had access and was there on the very land of Canaan that was promised to them.
What does do you know offhand?
What?
Do you know offhand what Canaan means?
No, but Nick or Sheldon will tell us in a minute.
And one of them will tell us.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Okay. The reason I raise that is because when you talk about the length of time that it took to get there, what we're talking about is the length of time that it took to get to that place of awareness and get a clarity on what was being offered as a result of the covenant, just as it has taken that time for us to get where we are. Go ahead.
Right. You're exactly right. You're right. You're exactly right. From the spiritual perspective, it took that long. Just like sometimes, just like we're thinking now, I can't wait to get to heaven. Well, we're already there. And if we keep waiting, we're going to be waiting for thousands of years. We're already there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's see. I thought that
Nick and Sheldon must be slow today.
they usually they're usually on the money. But anyway.
I found something. I was on mute for a second.
Okay.
So ancienthebrew.org. The root of the word Canaan, pronounced, actually not quite sure how it's pronounced, but the root of the word Canaan is Cana, meaning to be brought down by a heavy load. By extension, this word can also mean subdue or humble. So Kena or Kena.
It means subdued or humbled.
I also have the root is meaning to bow the knee, to fall on one's knee as well.
So it's talking about becoming humble. Humbling one's thoughts in order for them to become aware of the promise and what it means.
Yeah, and this humble thing doesn't mean a bad thing at all. It's more so of putting things in the proper order for elevation in the speak as well.
When you said that, Sheldon, what came to my mind when you started speaking actually was that the concept that we have put forth as being the truth, which is, of course, Christianity. There is no humility in Christianity. The only humility in Christianity are the words. Or is the word humility, rather. As far as being humble to understand the truth or to search for truth, it does not exist. Because if it did, then when a concept was presented to one who is in a position of leadership or stands in that space of a teacher, rather than being arrogant about that's not Baptistic or that's not what we believe as Christians, they would listen and see if it resonated with them, or they would do the research to see if it was real, as opposed to simply denouncing it simply because it's outside of the boundaries that they have set for meanings and understandings. I'm done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
agree wholeheartedly. In this sense, is as if you are opening, one is opening themselves up to experience God in a new way that they were not aware of prior to or right before that.
Thank you, Shell. Any other questions? Thank you, Shell. So we're at Abimelech here in chapter 20, and Abram, when he, as he was journeying, he asked Sarah to tell Abimelech, the king, because Sarah was a very, very beautiful woman. The Bible talks about there being 3 really very beautiful women, Sarah, Rebecca, I think Judah, someone else. But anyway, there were really very beautiful women in terms of the physical as well. And Abraham knew this and knew that she was a striking woman and would catch attention. And he asked Sarah to tell the king that she was his sister. And in fact, Abimelech did notice her, but God came to him in a dream and said, "Don't touch this woman. In the integrity of your heart, I know what you're thinking, but I also prevent you from sinning against her. That's why I did not allow you to touch her." So that in his heart, that's what he wanted to do, but God did not allow it. And Abimelech then called Abram to him and said, "What are you doing to me? Why are you doing this to me? How do I offend you? You didn't have to lie to me. Why didn't you just tell me she was your wife? Why did you tell me she was your sister?" And in verse 12 of Genesis 20, he says, "She is my sister. She's my father's daughter, but we didn't have the same mother." So in essence, he was saying she was her half sister. So he's saying he didn't truly lie about that. But in the end, the issue is Abimelech loaded him with stuff and says, "Okay, take your folk and go." And during this time, God had allowed, the Creator allowed things to happen such that Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, none of them could bear children. But when he let Abraham leave with Sarah, then the Lord opened up the wombs of those women of his home, of his house. And at this time, yeah, go ahead.
Ms. Barbara, quick question for you on questions to group. When Abraham said that this was his sister, whoever he said that to was kind of like in awe. Was like, why didn't you tell me this was your wife? What's the connection between that? Because if Abraham said, "Hey, this is my sister," the other person didn't say, "I don't care. I do what I want to do." But there has to be somewhat of a connection there for someone to say, "Hey, boss, why you didn't tell me this was your wife?" So is there a connection there I'm not seeing with that, or you or anyone can answer that?
One of the things I see in that is that Abraham did not even give Abimelech the opportunity to show what his true character was initially, because he initially told Sarah to say that she was his sister. So it's like Abraham prevented him from showing his character, cut him off at the pass, didn't even give him an opportunity. And Abimelech was saying, why didn't you just tell me this? Why didn't you just tell me she was your wife? Almost as if to say, had I known that, that wouldn't have been an issue if you had just told me that. But Abraham didn't even give him that opportunity. What does that say to us today?
Well, according to Barbara, the the writings of the prophets and the sages in relation to understanding that era. Also, Abram knew that if he had said to his wife, he could have very well been killed and his wife taken.
Well, that's true.
So, and that was very customary during that period of time.
That's true. So Abraham did not even know the character of Abimelech, and he was going under what he knew of the custom of the time.
Rev, what was your response again? You said someone might have died. I heard you, but I didn't. Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, I said that the customs of that time, according to the writers, was that if he had said it was his wife, he could very well have been killed, and then she taken from him.
And the other part of that is that Sarah thought it was best that she had a brother rather than no covering at all, because as the brother, Abraham got a bride's price for her from Abimelech and protection, and she also got protection from knowing Abraham was still out there, rather than her being in Abimelech's castle. What do you call it? Castles? Anyway, his palace, and not having his protection at all.
Barbara, can
It's yeah. Go ahead. You can back up.
I guess about 15 minutes earlier, when you were speaking in regards to Keturah, who Abram took as a wife after the death of Sarah. Keturah, it means, I think, is perfume.
Incense, yeah. Perfume, incense.
It is said that if you trace the history of Keturah, it is actually Hagar, who, when she left, went back to her homeland, and Abram took her as a wife, and the reason that her name was changed to Keturah is because she was as a sweet perfume before Elohim, because she had kept herself from being with any other man, and now she was back with Abram, and as a result of that, they were blessed with 5 sons, and Abraham took them, blessed them, which means that he gave them an understanding of spirituality and sent them into the east, and from that comes Brahman, Buddha, etc. Those
right.
So, okay.
Right, and actually they had 6 sons instead of 5. Yeah, that's what I understood occurred as well. And so actually, really, Hagar became his wife. So he had 2 wives, Sarah and Keturah.
You know what else is striking to me about that? Is that Isaac, did not have Elohim in his name. at all.
Right.
But Ishmael did. Ishmael.
Yeah.
Ish.
Hebrew last, right.
Is feminine. Ish. But altogether, of course, it means God hears or hearing God. But it struck me that he had God in his name, Elohim in his name, and it spoke to him as being masculine.
And the issue, and the thing is, Keturah is the one who said, "God has heard my cry." So she acknowledged the creator of Abraham, and that's when he told him, "You call him Ishmael."
Right.
Yeah, okay. Well, I want to get into the birth of Isaac, but that's going to be a minute. I'd like to continue that tomorrow. But for today, is there anyone who would like to summarize what they've taken from what we've discussed today?
What I see from today is that we have begun to see that the journey that we are on inevitably leads us to a place where we make a decision. And that decision is, are we going to not so much enter the covenant but recognize the covenant relationship that we are one with our Creator, and in doing so, become the doorkeeper to righteousness, not in terms of keeping people out, but be the doorkeeper in that you're introducing what loving kindness and forgiveness look like, and always in search of someone or in waiting for someone who is in search of guidance that will lead them to the same place where we are. Also understanding that even though there are offspring from the same their journey is pretty much governed by the womb that they exit. And that means that even though our truth is the seed of truth, the one who receives it, how they regurgitate it, determines whether or not they're going to continue the journey of truth in order for them to bring offspring into existence who will be the progenitors of the same truth, or whether they're going to have to go through multiple changes before they are able to get right back to where they started, and that is the journey of being aware of what truth actually looks like. And in doing so, we are going to be faced with choices. And the choices that we're going to be faced with is standing up to those who challenge us, or not standing up to them in regards to what Abraham did about Sarah. And even if we are unwilling to stand up for what we know the truth to be, the Creator is not going to allow the truth to die with our ineptness or our fears. The truth will always survive all of that. And we can embrace the idea of what we have done, be forgiven for it, and move forward, or we can live at that space and not become open or more aware as to who we were created to be. And the bottom line is, what we are being shown is that we are no different on having traveled this religious journey than were those before us. Right now, having traveled that religious journey has prepared us to be more open to what the truth is, in that we are very much aware of the words on the pages, but now we're becoming more aware of the concepts that's lifted from the symbols on those pages. and we have opportunity to share this with the world, in that we have the opportunity to have dominion over the earth consciousness, and that dominion mandates us to feel the atmosphere, feel the macro with the concepts as they were intended to be, making them available to the whole of mankind, thus granting mankind the opportunity to become human, and realizing that being human means that this is Elohim, this is God having a physical experience. That's what I got from it.
You got a lot from the lesson. Thank you very much. And so we're learning to put the symbols not just as a symbol, but to translate that into an experience. And Abraham was a symbol of loving kindness. So we have to translate that energy into our own energy and our own experience. He sought people that he could go out there and show loving kindness to. And so that's what we are to do. In spite of what we see on TV, in spite of what we hear, in spite of what people say, in spite of the fact that they call you out your name, you got to still seek to show loving kindness. Tomorrow, we'll start with chapter 21, Genesis, birth of Isaac. Unless there are any other comments or questions, see you then.
Ms. Barbara,
Yes,
I got one statement I got to make, and it has really nothing to do with the lesson, or maybe it has something to do with the lesson. Our grill will be here at the end of this year, sometime in November, sometime in December. And I say it's our grill because everyone has contributed to it. Maybe by a conversation, maybe by a debate, argument. Everyone has contributed to the grill. Some will have access to the grill more so than I do. And what I mean by that is Robbie is our personal chef, and Robbie has a catering business. So if you want to use the grill, there's no problem. You have to communicate with Robbie. I have to communicate with Robbie. I only needed Father's Day weekend for a cookout or a cooking competition in Blenheim, South Carolina. That's the only time I needed. Whatever your talent is, I feel the grill will complement your talent. So our grill will be here sometime in November or sometime before the year runs out. Reb, I need to get with you to process some things about this grill. But that's all I wanted to share with you. That's it.
Well, we thank you for that advertisement. And Robbie can cook, so thank you very much. I'll see you guys. I'll hear from you tomorrow at 11.
We'll see you tomorrow on the phone.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.